My name is Richelle. I'm reporting here today for Now Yoga in Portland, Oregon. In addition, you can find me, the Yoga Engineer, online at yogaengineer.com. You can ask questions of me through a direct email at Richelle, Richelle, at yogaengineer.com, because we'll go over some stuff that's kind of technical, and if you have personal questions about your anatomy and your alignment, I'm happy to help out if you reach out to me. All right, so for today's lesson, this is part 1 of 2 on the arms and hands. Today we'll be covering structural anatomy, and part 2 we'll be covering action anatomy. I highly recommend that you set up a practice space in front of a mirror as we talk about these things, because we're going to talk about individual differences, and you'll want to see what your body is really like as we go over some specific principles. It's also handy to have a roll of tape, either Scotch tape, masking tape. I like to use electrical tape because it comes in different colors and I like that. It's also pretty sticky and sticks to things like the mat material that we have. All right, first of all, we should touch on some principles of physiology. We, in the yoga world, do a lot based on philosophy and alignment based on cueing that's been around for a really long time. My approach to teaching is based on these principles of physiology that really are rooted in our anatomy, our kinesiology, how our body actually works in space, time, and gravity. So, 2 principles that we'll focus on for today's lesson are 1, the shape of your bones individually, not mine, but yours, defines your safest alignment, okay? The second here is muscles in their mid-range are strong and safe. What does that mean? That means that when you're using your muscles, if they're too short or overly stretched while you're trying to do work with them, that is what we call risk areas. The mid-range is where the muscle fibers can both contract with good strength and also hold itself together without straining, tearing, or unfortunately pulling off of a bone. Those are things we'd like to avoid. My highest purpose in teaching yoga is to try to keep people from being hurt and instead be safe and strong and resilient so that you have a sustainable asana practice for your whole life. So the shape of your bones defines your alignment, and then muscles in mid-range are going to be strongest and most safe. All right, so we'll take a quick look at some bony anatomy. This is my friend Fred. I've already removed one of his arms from his body here. Thanks, Fred, for being in the house. You might notice here in his attached arm that the shoulder joint, a ball and socket joint, you might see that it's round here at the arm where it meets the socket of the shoulder blade. The joint itself isn't actually in the armpit. So when we think about how wide our shoulders are, we're not talking about like here where our armpits are. We're really looking at this area out here where the humerus would meet the shoulder blade. This is way farther out than most of us think of it. And so we really need to take advantage of that 2 inches. That will be important in the long run as we try to not overcompensate in our weight bearing with our pectoral muscles and can keep a broad chest and strong back. All right, so the arm bone is called the humerus, while the forearm bones below the elbow are the ulna on the pinky side of your forearm. It's the bone that creates the pokey elbow point, while the radius is on the thumb side. Notice as well that you can have a very stable upper arm and rotate from the elbow so that your palm faces down. When we get past the forearm and into the wrist, these are the carpal bones. The carpal bones meet up with the metacarpal bones, the long bones of your hand. Ideally, these bones all line up with each other. We think about bony stacking as a stable place, but one thing we have to remember is that our bones stacking, we have to stack them according to the actual bones in our body, not some ideal picture that we've seen in a book or heard about from our teachers. In fact, you'll notice in your own body that if you allow your shoulders to be broad, your collarbones to be open without overdoing it and collapsing the back body, allowing the shoulder and the elbow to just hang in gravity, that oftentimes your arms aren't straight. Most people, a very, very few, will have a straight arm. Very few people have a straight arm, while most people have what we call a carrying angle. This is really an adaptation so that when we carry things, we're not just bashing into our thighs with our buckets of water coming from the stream to our camp, right? Instead, it's efficient to have that bony structure that keeps our hands wide as we walk through space, carrying whatever it is we have. Today, it's probably more like groceries or our handbags. So, one thing to keep in mind, again, my arms don't have a particularly deep carrying angle. And even then, my hands are still wider than my elbow and my shoulder. I have a colleague in the room today, James is going to join me up here, and show you how two different people will have significantly different carrying angles. I have relatively straight arms, while James has a pretty intense lateral deviation. If he spreads his palm wide and really activates, you even notice how much space there is between his thigh and his pinky finger. If he were to not change the line of his humerus, but bend his elbow, look at how wide out his hand goes. If he were to flip that over as if he was going to put it on the earth, you can see that his hands are very wide and his fingertips don't point straight up for the sky. They have what we call a turnout. This is his neutral. This is his perfect alignment. So if he translates that to, say, a plank pose or a up of a push-up, he would keep the width of his hands just as they were and straighten them out. So his hands are remarkably wide. This is good. This is not something that should be corrected in, because that would just overfire the pecs and start compressing into the shoulder joint, firing muscles that really shouldn't be used to hold us up. Thanks so much, James. All right, so once you have examined yourself in the mirror and found what your perfect alignment is for you, then you can take that to the ground. And this is where our tape comes in. You should take 2 pieces of tape so that they're ready to go as you let your arms hang, collarbones light, buoyant, and broad. Let the elbows be straight without locking out, and let your wrist be totally in alignment with your forearm. You don't want to try to point the fingers straight down or out to the side. Let them be in perfect alignment with your forearm. Then reach your hands forward, trying really hard not to just mechanically bring everything in out of habit. Keep that width. Look in the mirror. Make sure your elbow is still just in front of your shoulder joint. Then turn your palms over. That's that rotation we talked about. Then bend your wrists. If you try to point your wrist straight for the sky here while keeping everything else where it was, you'll notice that there's this pinching on the thumb side. That's really not good, especially when we start to take our hands into weight bearing. If you look at your palm, you'll notice that the plane of your palm and fingers is one place while the thumb is someplace else, yeah? And with that, you'll notice as well the pads of your fingers face the sky while the pad of your thumb looks across your palm. The whole thumb structure is not really a part of the whole palm, and neither is it a part of this long, energetic, and physiological path. So we want to start taking the thumb out of the situation. We want to not bear weight in the joint that connects the thumb to the wrist. It's pretty fragile, so we're gonna just soften the thumb and bring it in, and over time, learn to align through the forearms and out through the index and middle finger knuckles. So, with that tape handy, you'll find your place, okay? And then place it on the mat. Now notice, even with my body that doesn't have particularly deep carrying angle, I'm off the mat completely. That's okay. As long as I can root through those index and middle finger knuckles and soften my thumb in, I'll be fine. So once I find that alignment, I'm gonna place my piece of tape inside my thumb on both sides so that every time I bring my hands to the earth, even though my brain is going to say, put them here, now that visual on my mat will say, nope, keep them wider. As long as I can see that piece of tape, I know I'm in good shape, okay? The next thing we want to discuss is the hyperextension that tends to happen in the wrist joint. Remember our principle that muscles in mid-range are their strongest. If we take the angle of our wrist to its maximum, these muscles are no longer in their mid-range. They are at their absolute limits. So we don't have the strength to push the earth away using those wrist flexors. If we align ourselves on our mat with our shoulders in front of our wrists, we come into hyperextension. And that is the best place for us to collapse completely into the bones of the wrist. That is a crushing, not happy place for our carpal tunnel, that place where all of the tendons and blood vessels run through and the nerves from our forearm into our hand. So instead, if we take the entire arm, the whole plane of the arm, behind the crease of the wrist, and make that joint a little bit more than 90 degrees, then we can use our flexors to come up into those knuckles and take weight out of the wrist bones so that we can gather in the belly, we can open in the heart, and then we have this very stable place to be. Whereas as soon as we come too far forward and try to sustain that, our hips feel heavier, our core is harder to engage, and our back muscles and chest are no longer in balance. Pushing back and staying back, that is where our stability and safety really live. Again, if you have any questions about this, please don't hesitate to reach out. My name is Richelle. I am the yoga engineer. I'm happy to help. Stay tuned for part 2, where we go over the action anatomy that will help bring all this together. Thanks so much.